Hello everyone, and welcome back to Void Dwarf Studios. Today we are going back into the Age of Sigmar and we are going to look at the Stormcast Eternals. In this particular episode, we are going to be looking at the battle lines for your Stormcast army, and depending on your battle line depends very much on what kind of Stormcast army you're going to have. I will break them down, tell you more or less their various strengths and weaknesses, how they fit into the lore, and you make your own choices as to which ones you want to have from there. First up, and by far the most numerous and famous, you'll see these dotted around all the Warhammer shelves, the Liberator. These are the rank and file of almost every single Stormhost that Sigmar has. Each and every one a warrior, a hero in their own right. They were created by Sigmar using a combination of the Soulforge, his godlike lightning powers, and Grugni's smithing, creating a warrior that is unsurpassed by any humankind has ever been able to produce. Clad in Sigmarite armour from head to toe, these guys are tanks. You won't find tougher infantry in the mortal realms unless it's a Chaos Warrior. That is literally its only comparison. Trained and drilled constantly in their gladiatorial arenas, these Liberators are at the forefront of almost every single major engagement, and they can be armed in multiple different ways. Depending on what you want them to do, depends on what kind of weapons you choose to give them. Some Liberators prefer the traditional hammer and shield, presenting a solid shield wall to the enemy and then clouting the unfortunate person on the head with a giant hammer, imbued with Sigmar's energy. Some go for wielding two-handed weapons to do extra choppy or smashy, and some like to dual-wield weapons for that extra speed. Depending on the Stormhost, its history and the cultures within it, tends to dictate what kind of weapons you want to use. On the tabletop, it's relatively straightforward. You take your hammers and shields, or sword and shields if you want to make a solid front line. You take some two-handed weapons if you want to have a bit more smash damage, or you take dual-wielding weapons if you want a bit more extra attacks. In either case, these guys are tough. Guys and girls, I should say. They are all very, very tough soldiers. And as they are imbued with a portion of Sigmar's power, it means that their attacks aren't just, you're not just being smashed over the head with a heavy hammer, you're being smashed over the head with a hammer imbued with the power of lightning. And Stormcasts over time only get better at channeling this power, meaning that, things like Nighthaunt are going to struggle against Stormcast, because their weapons can harm them as opposed to the average Joe. However, the Stormcast who are particularly gifted at channeling the godlike energies of Sigmar, they become Secutors. These join the Sacrosanct Chamber and are predominantly used for fighting demons and undead. This is because, in life, Stormcast from this chamber were priests, monks, people with faith, people who could channel the powers of gods and essentially use them to banish spirits. This makes them particularly handy when they're fighting against, the Nighthaunt, who have become very prevalent, and this is why the Sacrosanct Chamber has become more at the forefront of the battles. They perform a very similar function to a Stormcast Liberator, really. The only real difference is that these Sacrosanct Chamber prosecutors only use hammers, like one-handed and two-handed hammers, but still hammers. The only exception being the Secutor Prime, who will occasionally be armed with a Tempest Sword. Although, on the whole, it's hammers. Hammers all the way. This is predominantly because the hammer is the sacred symbol of Sigmar. Gal Maraz, that wonderful little hammer. That is why the Stormcast prefer to use this weapon. All the better for channeling the power and just, smashing spirits and undead into small pooled pieces. They also have a fantastic ability that allows them to banish the undead. They actively channel the energy into their shields as well as their weapons to allow them to better withstand these spiritual attacks. This means that you will take these people if you are fighting undead or you're fighting demons, as they gain bonuses and advantages on the tabletop, which you should thoroughly take advantage of. However, just quickly to mention, if you do want to use a Sacrosanct Chamber and you want the Secutors to be your battle line, you're going to need a Lord Arcanum. These are the leaders who lead the prosecutors into battle, so just bear that in mind if you want these to be your battle line. And these will be your only battle line choice. You won't get access to any of the ranged weapons you get from the normal Stormhost, like the next thing we're about to talk about. So, if you want a bit more range on your battle line, however, you want Judicators. Judicators are your range support units. They can still be battle line, which is really handy, because they have a wide variety of different ways to kill you at a distance. They can kill you at a distance with either a Skybolt bow, essentially an arrow that turns into an arc of lightning when it fires, a particularly nasty and unpleasant way to get hit, or you take a Boltstorm crossbow, which, although the range is a bit shorter, it packs a much bigger punch, each one of these crossbow bolts crackling with electrical energy. These guys are definitely there when you want to kill things at a distance. And if you want a little bit extra firepower, then some of your Judicators can take the heavier Shockbolt bow, basically the bigger bow to the Skybolt, or they can take the Thunderbolt crossbow. Guess what this is? It fires a twin-tailed comet of energy which strikes the enemy square in the chest. And yeah, that's as unpleasant as it gets. And you know, in case someone gets a little too close, they all have their little Storm Gladius, basically a long knife in case you need to do any stabby. These guys are relatively straightforward. They have crossbows and bows. Use them for different enemies, and keep them near the back so they don't get into too much melee. But these will be fantastic against most lightly armoured and medium armoured troops. And you know, it's a Stormcast, so it's pretty tough already, so it can take a little bit of a beating. Just try to avoid getting them into too many combats, as they lack their hammer and shield wielding brothers and sisters. Yeah, these could get killed relatively easily compared to the Liberators and Secutors. The last battle line option you get, at least for the moment, is your Varangard Hunters, and they must be led by a Lord Aquila. These are your predominantly scouting forces, your skirmishers, your advanced guard, and they're kind of a jack of all trades for Stormcast. You can have them with mixed weapons, with lighter crossbows, and many of them come with axes and swords. Whilst I wouldn't say they are my personal favourite choice for a battle line, they are great for utility. Not only can this unit shoot, but it can also fight pretty decently in close combat, and bearing in mind that a Stormcast Eternal is pretty damn tough at the best of times, even without the special shields they use, they are still pretty tough in their Sigmarite plate. So I would personally use these guys as, well, exactly what they are. They are the skirmishing force. And then have something big like, say, I don't know, a couple Dracoffs or something like that, some paladins, come and smash things around the middle. So if you want to outmaneuver your opponent and you don't want to get stuck into a traditional grindy battle line, your Varangard Hunters are probably the best way to go. This was much shorter than the Nighthawk video, but to be fair, the Stormcast have fairly straightforward options when it comes to their battle lines, and it kinda helps that, on the whole, all the Stormcast are very similar. For example, your Liberators are all warriors in life who, well, you know, died at the hands of Chaos, and depending on how they died and what they were doing and what they were good at, dictates what kind of chamber they end up in. If you were a hunter or an archer and you died fighting Chaos, you end up being a Judicator. If you were particularly good with weapons and, you know, close quarters combat, you're a Liberator. If you were a monk, a mage, or a priest and you were, you know, enjoyed the smashy, then you tended to become a Secutor. And so in this way, each Stormcast kind of naturally gravitates towards one mode of warfare over another, and if they are particularly talented in this form of warfare, then they will become leaders, generals, each one leading their own particular Stormhost. I hope you enjoyed this relatively brief video. Please like and subscribe, let me know how you feel I'm doing, and thank you so much to all my new subscribers. It's really wonderful to see this channel growing, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Take care, everyone.